The ruins of Jerusalem rose like ghosts before the eyes of those who dared to look upon them. Shattered walls, burned gates, scattered stones, each fragment a living reminder of defeat, shame, and abandonment. To many, the holy city was nothing more than a distant echo of lost glory. But it was in this desolate setting that one of the most astonishing stories in the Bible was born. In the halls of the Persian Empire, far from the land of his fathers, a simple man, the king's cupbearer, heard of Jerusalem's pain. His name was Nehemiah, and the news of the broken walls did not merely sadden him. It ignited a fire within him that would change history. In tears and prayer, Nehemiah made plans. In fasting and vigilance, he gathered courage. And when the moment came, he moved with determination. What seemed impossible, to rebuild a devastated city, to unite a fragmented people, and to face relentless enemies, was accomplished in just 52 days. How did Nehemiah achieve such a feat? Was it only discipline and leadership? Or was there an unseen hand guiding every stone placed back in its rightful place? Today, we will dive into this narrative of faith and strategy, hope and mystery. The story of how one ordinary man, driven by a divine mission, rebuilt not only walls, but also the very identity of a people. Imagine Jerusalem in the 5th century BC, no longer the majestic city of David, nor the splendor of Solomon, but a shadow of itself. Its walls lay broken, its gates burned by fire, and its houses abandoned or reduced to rubble. The temple had already been rebuilt under Zerubbabel, but the city still carried the weight of humiliation. To the eyes of neighboring nations, Jerusalem was a place without defense, fragile, exposed. In the ancient world, a city without walls was not only vulnerable to invasion, it was a symbol of shame, a people without protection, without honor, without identity. The exiles who had returned from Babylon faced not only poverty and instability, but also the hostility of the surrounding peoples: Samaritans, Ammonites, Arabs, and Edomites. These neighbors not only despised the Jews, but also feared that Jerusalem might rise again as a political and spiritual force. It was in this dark context that the news reached Nehemiah, far away, serving in the Persian court. For many, those ruins were irreversible, the destiny of a defeated city. But for Nehemiah, the rubble was a calling, and every fallen stone seemed to whisper, "Who will have the courage to lift us up again?" Nehemiah was not a king, nor a priest, nor a general. He was merely the cupbearer of King Artaxerxes in the distant fortress of Susa. At first glance, a modest position, but in reality, it was a role of immense trust. The cupbearer stood among the closest to the sovereign, responsible not only for tasting the king's food and wine, but also for being a silent guardian of his life. It was in this place of apparent anonymity that Nehemiah received the news that would change everything. Jerusalem, the city of his ancestors, still lay in ruins. When he heard, his heart broke. He wept, fasted, and prayed for days. But he did not remain in lament. Something began to stir within him, a calling, a purpose. Unlike so many who had perhaps already accepted the shame of Jerusalem as final, Nehemiah saw a mission. And more, he dared to ask the Persian king not only for permission to return, but also for official letters, military escort, and resources for the rebuilding. It was unthinkable. A Jewish exile asking the emperor of Persia to support the raising of walls that could strengthen a people once subjugated. Yet, against all expectations, the king's heart inclined. From that moment on, Nehemiah was no longer just a cupbearer. He became the architect of a vision, the strategist of a dream, the leader of a people. And the most astonishing part was still to come. How could he accomplish in just a few days what seemed impossible for decades? When Nehemiah finally arrived in Jerusalem, he did not rush to speak, nor did he try to gather the leaders immediately. Instead, he chose the silence of the night. Under the dim light of the moon, and with only a few men by his side, he rode through the ruins of the city. What he saw was heartbreaking. Collapsed gates, burned timbers, stones scattered like the bones of a fallen giant. But that nocturnal inspection was not just practical, it was symbolic. Nehemiah was not simply looking at walls. He was facing the consequences of generations of neglect, invasions, and spiritual decay. And it is here that his leadership becomes enigmatic. While many saw only rubble, Nehemiah discerned a future city, rebuilt and thriving. It is as if the story whispers to us today. When we face ruins in our own lives, whether personal, emotional, or spiritual, how do we look at them? Do we see only debris, or do we glimpse the possibility of renewal? The mystery remains. What gave Nehemiah the certainty that those broken stones could once again form an unshakable fortress? At dawn, Nehemiah broke the silence of his arrival. He gathered priests, nobles, and workers, but he did not bring mere words. He brought a vision. While everyone else saw scattered stones and burned gates, Nehemiah described a city that did not yet exist, a Jerusalem restored, secure, and once again worthy of the name of its God. His speech was not made of empty promises, but of conviction. He told them how the king of Persia had granted resources, how the hand of God had been upon him, and how that moment was not just a political opportunity, it was a spiritual calling. The people, who until then lived in resignation, began to move. As if a flame had been lit among the ashes, a chorus of determination rose. Let us rise up and build. But here lies the mystery that echoes through the centuries. How did Nehemiah manage, in so little time, to turn collective discouragement into an irresistible force of reconstruction? What was in his words that not only inspired, but ignited the faith of a broken nation? News of the rebuilding did not remain within Jerusalem's borders. Soon the neighboring peoples, Samaritans, Ammonites, Arabs, and Philistines, realized something was underway. The rebirth of Jerusalem was not merely a work of stones. It was a cry of identity, a threat to those who benefited from Israel's fragility. The provocations began with mockery. What are these feeble Jews doing? If a fox climbs on that wall, it will fall. But ridicule quickly turned into conspiracy. There were plans for attacks, ambushes, anything to halt the work before it could be completed. And this is where Nehemiah's strategy emerges. He didn't stop the reconstruction to wait for peaceful times. On the contrary, he organized the people to work with one hand on the tool and the other on the weapon. Ordinary men became builders and warriors at the same time, turning the wall into a rampart of faith and resistance. The mystery that hovers over this narrative is, how did a weary population, surrounded by enemies, not only resist but accelerate the work, as if each stone were laid to the rhythm of divine urgency? Beyond courage, there was method. Nehemiah did not simply build a wall, he coordinated a system. The map of Jerusalem became a tactical board. Families, priests, and craftsmen were assigned to specific sections, many of them in front of their own house. Each group took charge of a microfront, with clear goals and neighbors serving as a natural form of accountability. The result? Multiple parts advancing at once, like synchronized gears. He prioritized critical points, gates, corners, elevations, where vulnerability was greatest. Meanwhile, logistics flowed. Asaph's timber, stones rescued from the rubble, rotating shifts, night watchmen, and the trumpet as a rapid response protocol. If the sound echoed, everyone knew where to converge. There were no pauses. Short prayer, firm decision, immediate execution. This architecture of responsibilities created something rare, speed with cohesion. No one worked for the wall in the abstract. Everyone worked for their section, for the street where their children would walk, for the gate that guarded their memory. And so, as if the city itself were calling its inhabitants by name, Jerusalem began to rise not only by human strength, but by belonging. Nehemiah was not only an efficient administrator, Above all, he was a man who believed the work belonged to God. Every threat received a dual response, practical planning and spiritual supplication. We prayed to our God and set a guard day and night against them, the book records. It was not naive faith, but faith accompanied by strategy. This trust worked like fuel. A people who had lived for decades among ruins suddenly believed that each stone replaced was part of a greater plan. The work was not only material reconstruction. It was liturgy, memory, an act of worship. And the mystery lies here. How could such discreet faith, expressed in short prayers in the middle of battle, sustain an entire people against enemies, exhaustion, and scarcity? Perhaps because it was never just about a wall, but about the conviction that God himself dwelt among those stones. Then the impossible happened. In just 52 days, Jerusalem once again had complete walls. The achievement was so extraordinary that the enemies had no choice but to admit. They realized that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. But why so fast? Because it was not merely human strength. It was the convergence of rare factors: firm leadership, military strategy, community mobilization, and above all, unshakable faith. Nehemiah turned a disorganized people into a united front, where every hammer strike was also an act of spiritual resistance. The wall, more than just stones, became a symbol of identity and promise, a reminder that when faith joins action, even time itself seems to bend. The walls were standing, but the true miracle was only beginning. The city was not made only of stones. It was made of memory, faith, and destiny. Nehemiah understood that rebuilding Jerusalem did not just mean raising defenses against external enemies, but also restoring the heart of the people. That is why, after the work was finished, came moments of reading the law, of confession, and of spiritual renewal. The stones protected the body of the city, but it was the word that restored its soul. And here arises a provocative question. Are our greatest ruins on the outside or on the inside? Rebuilding walls is an achievement, but rebuilding hope is a miracle. Time passed, empires rose and fell, and Jerusalem's walls would be attacked again in future wars. But Nehemiah's legacy was not only in the stones he rebuilt, but in the spirit he awakened in his people. He showed that faith and strategy are not enemies, but allies, that courage and prudence can walk side by side, and that rebuilding is not merely a practical task, but a divine calling. Nehemiah was not a king, nor a prophet in the classical sense. He was a servant, a discreet leader who knew how to unite spirituality and action, prayer and labor, tears and sweat. That is why his story still echoes as an invitation to every generation. What walls do you need to raise today? Walls that protect, that unite, that guard what is sacred. Rebuilt Jerusalem became a symbol of hope, proof that even the most devastated ruins can rise again under God's hand. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson. Walls may fall, but they can be rebuilt. Yet it is faith that gives meaning to every stone placed back in its place. Just as Nehemiah rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem, each of us carries invisible walls that need rebuilding, walls of faith, courage, and hope. If this story spoke to your heart, consider joining us on this journey. There are many more biblical mysteries and secrets waiting to be uncovered together. And who knows, maybe the next video will hold answers to questions you've always carried. God bless your life.